Hello and welcome to Higher Art and Design How to Pass. I've started with a summary so that if you don't want to watch the whole thing, hopefully you get a good broad brushstroke of this right at the beginning. Folios are a huge part of the overall mark. They are for every certificated course within art and design. So they are really, really important and we must get them finished. Pupils must follow deadlines. They'll be given a list of deadlines which need to be followed to make sure that everybody's on track and to make sure that they're likely to finish the course. Supported study is available on a Wednesday after school with Mrs. Niche and a Thursday after school with Mrs. Deeney. These are opportunities, obviously, to catch up with any work that is outstanding, but also it means that there's far more of an opportunity to get a lengthy one-to-one with the teacher about the individual folios. Both folios must be completed by the end of March. If not, then a pupil is likely to be withdrawn because they are such a huge part of the overall grade. At higher, they're worth almost 2/3. Written exam. Pupils will be given information they can revise for the mandatory question. Teachers tend to work in slightly different ways, but they give information in a pack to the pupils. They request responses to questions, and those responses will then get marked by the teacher more than once. And it's those kind of like responses that need to be revised for the prelim and for the exam. All answers must be justified points. I'll come back to that, but basically you can't just make a statement. You need to make sure that you actually justify it with reasons and explanations. Knowledge of the glossary of art and design terms is necessary. Within the written exam, there is only 1/3 of it which is covered by the mandatory question that they can revise for. The other 2/3 are two questions which they've never seen before. We don't know what prompt words they're going to use, and so they need to be really au fait with all of the different art and design terms that are possible. So the marking structure, the design folio that was mentioned has got 100 marks attached to it. The expressive folio, so that's the drawing and painting folio, has also got 100 marks. Within each of those 100 marks, there is 10 marks for an evaluation. I'll come back to that as well. It's incredibly important. It cannot be done just ad hoc at the end. It needs to have some teacher responses to make sure that it's structured in the right way. Art and design studies. So that's the written work that's used for the exam, and pupils will either be studying an artist or a designer, depending on the teacher's preference, but it's half of what they would normally do. Normally they would do both. But this is to do with the restricted requirements that is a leftover, if you like, from the kind of like the COVID arrangements. The higher prelim is an hour and 15 minutes long and it's worth 60 marks in all. So the portfolios that were mentioned are submitted to the SQA, to the exam board for marking. They get marked by at least 2 different people. Normally, they can quite often end up being marked by 3 at that actual marking. SQA submission date for the final portfolio presentation is at the end of March. There is no time to play with when we come back after the Easter break. So if, as I say, they haven't kind of like finished by that time, then there is very little chance of them completing the course. Pupils are supported to choose individualised themes. We like to make sure that pupils have the choice, but also that they engage with the folios, and therefore these individualised themes, particularly at higher, are really, really important. It must a lot of the imagination, the ideas, the involvement with the theme needs to come from the individual pupil. So each pupil has a different theme and the review of work is ongoing. It means that we're going around constantly making sure that everybody is very clear as to what their next steps is, and quite often also just writing a little list of the different tasks that will allow them to move forwards. Design choices this year for higher are graphics or body adornment, which is mostly masks, and the expressive choices will be still life, portraiture, or natural environment. As I said already, just to be aware that currently there's reduced requirements in place post-COVID. That means that there are some parts, particularly within the actual exam, where they're only sitting half the paper. Within the folios, that's quite slimmed down. If you have further offspring that are coming through, the likelihood is they'll be asked to do more. So the expressive portfolio is made up of 2 investigation studies, so 2 drawings, 2 development studies, so that tends to be where they start looking at composition and experimenting with different materials, and a final piece. So it's important to note that it doesn't need to be large scale. In the past, we've sometimes gone very large with these final pieces. It is not required. It's far more to do with the pace of the candidate and the quality of work that they are creating. So if they're more adept at working within small scale detail, and they have a very accomplished A4 piece, that's absolutely fine. And also to be aware as well that there is no mark that is purely for that final piece. That is really important. There's an evaluation which was mentioned earlier, and that can be seen on that top sheet there on the right hand side. And again, I'll come back and explain a little bit more about that. I'd like to tell you about the marking, which is on the next slide, but if I flip backwards and forwards, this will get deleted. So I'll see if I can explain this to you and then show you the words. There is a process mark of 40%. So there's one which is just purely for the research. So if you think about the imagery that is at the beginning, making sure that it comes right through to the end, 10 marks allotted to that. And there's another 30 marks that's allotted to basically the flow the whole way through, making sure we've got the same imagery, and you can see that we have on all of these pieces of work coming through to this final piece here. Then there are also 50 marks which are to do with skills. Half of those are to do with the use of materials, so the fact that they've used charcoal, looks like paint, pencils, pen, and then working their way through to the final piece. Looks like it's been paint that's been used for that final piece there. And then there's another 25, which is for the visual element. So the way they've composed that final piece, so that's really been refined. It's moved on, although it's using all of the items that are there, the use of colour, the use of tone, and any other visual element. So if I flip over to there, hopefully you can see that the process is worth 40 and the skills are worth 50. And the other 10 is for the evaluation. The design folio, starting off with the design brief, again, to emphasise that there's a lot of pupil choice within this. So the pupil needs to define that design brief, and we help them to do that. So this one here is a poster, and it looks like it's got a light bulb with some kind of aspect of the imagery that they're using. 3 relevant examples of market research. Market research is basically examples of the design that already exist. So you can see there are some wee examples of posters in the bottom right hand of that top sheet there. And one other piece of investigation, such as an image or a source of inspiration. So they've done a light bulb here. There can be more. This is the minimum that's required that we've stated here. Just bearing that in mind, we don't need lots and lots of images of market research. We don't need lots and lots of individual images that don't end up at the end. Again, we need to see this through flow. We need to see the images running the whole way through. That thread is really important. And we also don't want overly cluttered pages. They don't like things overlapping, and they don't like information in there that is not necessary. 2 to 4 developments. So you can see there's maybe 6 or 7 developments there, and a final solution. So the final solution comes from this one here. It's refined. There's more that's been put in there. We've got another little block of colour put down there because there's more lettering that needed to come over. The date's been moved up to the top. There's changes. There's clarification of the design. And then also an example of it within situ. So again, with the marking, there are 10 marks at the beginning for that initial process for the research. So all of that is there. You've got your market research, your single image, that's great. That would be 10. You've got another 30 for the flow of that image through this entire folio, up until the final piece there, and that's definitely there. We've then got the skills marks. So within design, we're looking at, again, the use of materials. So it looks like they've used cut paper, maybe printmaking. There are a lot of different materials and skills that have been shown there. I think probably using computer towards the end. And then the other 25 marks is for the use of aesthetics and function. So making sure that we've got a functioning design that actually gives the information that's required and yet is impactful and really grabs the attention. And as ever, you've got that evaluation at the end, which is the other 10 marks. So you can see here, you've got your process, which is the 40 marks, and the skills, that is the 50. And again, really important to be aware, there is no mark for the final piece alone. All of these marks are tied into the process. So evaluations. With the evaluation here, you can see this person would get no marks whatsoever. But we need each of those for each folio. So one for the design folio, one for the expressive folio. They're worth 10% of that folio mark, and they need to describe the decisions the pupil has made throughout the folio work. Each point should be justified. What effect did the decision have? What did they make? Did they make that? Why did they make that decision? So explaining the purpose and the reason of the decisions that they've made and what effect that's had on the overall design. As it says at the bottom here, purely describing the process of the folio will gain 0 marks. Really important to note that. And like the written work, it's really important that they get a version to the teacher who can then give them some input, and then they can update that so that we hopefully gain as many marks there as possible. Otherwise, you're just kissing goodbye to 10 marks, and that is just heartbreaking. The written exam, so we've got a mandatory question at higher, so just one, because they're only doing half the paper. Normally you would have one for expressive and one for design. They just have one. So select one artwork that you've studied with reference to that artwork. Explain the artist's working methods, artist's choice of subject matter, impact of social, cultural, or other influences. Now, we know what all the prompt words for that are going to be, so we get pupils to rehearse a response for each of the prompt words that they're likely to get. And so if they have done that, if they've allowed a teacher to mark their work, give them more input back, and they've revised the one that has been marked and had input back at least once, then they can have a guaranteed 10 marks there as long as they've revised it and they have kept that fresh in their head. The ones that are less guaranteed are the optional questions. So 2 optional questions must be answered. So that's only one mandatory question that's worth 10 marks, and each of these optional questions is also worth 10 marks. So there's 2/3 of this that has got less of that safety net underneath it. And that's why pupils must be familiar with art and design glossary terms. We don't know exactly which prompt words are going to be used there. They haven't seen these images before, so the image is there. They need to take a really good look at that. And there's information underneath the image as well about the date that the thing was created, what size it is, what materials, who made it, etc. All of that will give more information. Really important they take time to read that. And as I've said at the bottom here again, all points must be justified. And again, a wee reminder, this mark is doubled up as the pupils are only sitting half of the paper they would normally sit. So for the end point here, because I've spoken about it so